Hello everybody, I'm the Crooked Mailman, and welcome to the premiere episode of What I Think. Since this show is new to the channel, I'm going to take some time and explain how it works. In this show, I'll be giving my opinions on games that I want to talk about. This can take forms of reviews, retrospectives, critiques, and other forms of discussion. However, what I won't be doing is letting my feelings about a game or its development get in the way of what I think about it. For instance, I love Super Mario 64, but that doesn't mean that I don't see its flaws. It would be wrong of me to simply praise the game and ignore its issues. The entire point is to spark discussion about video games in a healthy manner, so feel free to come at me in the comments with your opinions and I will happily have a scholarly conversation with you. Finally, here's what I think about the original Zelda. Nostalgia. A simple word, but a powerful force. It was something that I had a battle when making this retrospective, and it's important to note this because we're going to discuss Zelda 1 in its original and most recent context. Obviously, I played The Legend of Zelda many years ago, and its enchanting effects are not lost on me. In fact, I think that enchantment is something that the Zelda series captures that a lot of games fail to. This is more impressive when you remember that it came out just 5 months after Super Mario Bros. On the original NES, or Famicom, in Japan. It originally released on February 21st, 1986, then came to the US in August 1987 and hit Europe in November of that same year. So just what makes the game so enthralling anyways? Well, a good start is the story. Compared to most games widely available at the time, it was a simple but enticing one. A noble knight has to save the captured princess from the jaws of evil and save the land while doing so. A simple story, unraveling of the complex quest to find the hidden Triforce pieces scattered throughout the land. The Triforce was just icing on the cake and it served as a great gameplay element. But what about Zelda really hits that sweet spot and keeps me entertained? I really think what drew me in so hard was the exploration. The original Zelda has an entire world shrouded in mystery. You're dropped in with the goal and that's it. Nothing to help you on your way except for maybe the game's manual if you were lucky enough to own one. Even replaying this game for this video, this sent my imagination wild. It's been long enough that I forgot most things about this game and I immediately felt a familiar feeling when I saw that first screen. Zelda 1 was a world teeming with infinite possibilities, and I was really eager to explore it. I imagine this is what a lot of veteran players of the series felt when they booted up Breath of the Wild and walked out to the Great Plateau for the first time. It's a sense of wonder, mystery, and excitement that the game pushes into the mind of the player immediately upon starting, and this feeling is supported heavily by the gameplay design and overall progression. Zelda 1 is a quick series of dungeons ordered by their level number. While you don't have to do these in order, the game is definitely easier if you do. These dungeons aren't short by any means, but I also wouldn't say that they particularly stick out from each other in any real way. Because of this, I would never really put any of these dungeons in my favorites list. You'll definitely be spending more than half your time exploring these dungeons. There aren't really any cool gimmicks that these dungeons use based on their items like in later Zelda titles. Sure, there are some rooms that require you to use a candle, and there's a cool boss that requires you to use the dungeon item to make him vulnerable, but until you hit Death Mountain, these dungeons don't get super complex. Death Mountain, on the other hand, is its own beast, but we'll come back to that in a bit. The world around these dungeons is where the other half of your exploration will take place. The world is really daunting when you first jump into it, but it gets smaller every life you spend exploring around it. It really shows its size when you see it in a full map, which I'm going to show now, so if you don't want to see it, click ahead about 5 seconds. The map size may have been a limitation on the NES cartridges, but honestly it works out really well. Classic Zelda has a semi-roguelike structure where you're meant to make progression, fail, then continue with no penalty other than losing the time you spent exploring. This means that a map that is overly large would simply make the exploration dull and it would get way too repetitive way too quickly. You can get from one end to the map or the other in less than 5 minutes, meaning it doesn't feel like anything but a minor convenience to get back to an area of the minimap that you feel you didn't come through all the way, or sometimes even specific tiles that you feel you didn't explore every possible nook and cranny of. I never got frustrated trying to find any of the dungeons because every time I turned an unknown corner, it felt like I found something new. Sometimes it was a heart piece, sometimes it was a piece of advice pushing me in the direction I needed. Oh yeah, the world has heart pieces and some other stuff on it. For example, Link can get a white sword that does 2 times damage if he has enough heart pieces, and then he can get the magical sword that does 8 times damage from the graveyard if he has even more heart pieces. There's other goodies on the map that have minor effects, but I don't want to spoil all of them, so take my word for it. Exploring will net you rewards worth having. Finding these things made my brain flood with dopamine and I could not stop. I really got addicted to the X. I must have tried to bomb every rock and tried to burn every tree in the game. I maybe went a little overboard, but it was really worth it. To make things even better, every item in the game gets more than one use, and a lot of them have like the boomerang, bombs, and the wand help in combat. Speaking of combat, it's pretty frustrating, and probably the worst part of the game. The main mechanic is pretty simple. Push the button and hit enemies in their weak spots. The problem is that enemies do way more damage to you than you do to them, especially early on. The Dark Nuts are the worst enemies to fight with the sword. Then, to top things off, this game has a bad problem with flooding rooms with enemies. Overwhelming amounts of enemies in rooms where hits feel unavoidable make the combat the worst it can be. The bosses, on the other hand, are fun, and they don't feel like tank fests until the third dragon fight that definitely could have been something else. This game isn't full of content, so I don't really want to spoil the bosses. There aren't a lot of them, and they are reused. To sum combat up, the combat is fine in its core, but the use of it in situations the game puts you in are what brings it to its knees. The worst mechanic in the game, but only marginally so. I don't mean to make it come off as if it's really bad or anything. So after going dungeon to dungeon and fighting our way through the rest of the world, it's time to take on the final dungeon. And with it, the final boss. Death Mountain is the game's most complex dungeon. It even has multiple routes depending on what items you have. It is peak difficulty and exploration. It has around 50 or so rooms, and I actually really enjoyed this dungeon. It takes the conventions it's built on, brings out their best, and throws a couple new things in the mix. It also holds the final boss fight with, "Hey, I'm about to talk about the ending, so this is your spoiler warning. There's a time on screen to skip to if you want to skip this part. This part will have the boss, the fight, and the end of the game in it." With that out of the way, Ganon is the final fight. His fight is a little gimmicky. You give him a few smacks, then you shoot him with a big dungeon item, and that's it. It's simple, but the entire scene makes you feel like a badass. You just walk in, whip out your Triforce of Courage, kick his ass, and then save your princess. It was really sweet, and I thought it was really great. It made all my efforts feel worth it. The last thing I really want to talk about is the music. There's not a ton to talk about because this game lacks tracks, only having 10. Despite this, the music handled me well for the short time I spent with this game, and the sound effects didn't get really dull either. They were really catchy, and I think that they probably couldn't have done a better job, especially with the NES's limitations. That's pretty much everything good I have to say about the game, with my negatives mixed in. I'm really glad that I didn't have to bash on the game too hard because nothing really bad stood out. Honestly, when I write critique scripts and I play games thinking that manner, I come up with a lot that I would add. However, I really feel that there's nothing I would add to this game without the possibility of devaluing it. Zelda 1 feels like a finely balanced game with simple mechanics that leave just enough room for the player to push them to their limits. Any addition or subtraction may completely bring the game down. Finally, I want to discuss whether you should play the game or should have already played it. When this game was released, no one could have known that it would be made readily accessible for as many people as possible in the years to come. I can think of 7 different ways to play the game just off the top of my head. If you have somehow avoided playing Zelda 1 due to other games that you could have been playing during that time, you're missing out. Zelda 1 will treat you to a good afternoon and maybe a great weekend. If you play the yet unmentioned second quest, then you can change the layout of the game and give it another go. But should you take the time and play Zelda 1 today? Maybe not. I would definitely say that it was a unique experience that you couldn't get in a Zelda game up until Breath of the Wild. I would argue that the core design of both games is fairly similar, one just being made with a lot more experience and technology than the previous. I really think that if you want a small game to play during some downtime, Zelda 1 can be that title for you. I don't think it's super worth it to take time playing this game if you want a limited allowance for game time. Nintendo NES Access on the Switch is how I played both Zelda 1 and 2, but it was really nice because I could pick up where I left off anytime. I work a job where I wait a lot and I actually played a ton of both titles at work. I really think that's the best way to enjoy classic Zelda in today's gaming context. Alrighty, well that's pretty much everything I have to say about the original Legend of Zelda. If you liked this video, please don't forget to engage in the discussion below, follow me on socials, and if you really want to, you can even subscribe or click that bell to stay up with my notifications. I appreciate you guys coming and listening to me talk about Zelda 1 for, 10 minutes or so. It went pretty quick. My next video will be out probably in a couple weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, so if you really don't want to miss it, again, make sure you click that bell down there below. Please critique me on how you think this video was. If I didn't go into in-depth on a certain topic, or I missed something entirely, please let me know. I'm new to this style of video, and I'm here to learn as much as I can. Thank you for watching, and you have a good day.